The Memphis Grizzlies have won 9 of their last 10 basketball games. They are shining bright right before the NBA trade deadline. We're going to talk about the stars that are the most bright in the Memphis sky. We're going to talk about Gigi Jackson getting comfortable very quickly in the Grizzlies schemes. And what kind of trade would Memphis even make at this point with how well the team is playing? It's a new edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and I am so grateful, so thankful to be here with you on today's show. My name is Joe Mullinax. I am one of your hosts, your only host for this episode. DeMichael Cole, my co-host of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, has been flying solo the last couple of days for his old washed partner with all the late start times of later start times. I am with you today, flying solo, giving him a much-deserved day off. I'm a contributor for Grizzlied. I've been covering the Grizzlies here, there, and everywhere for over a decade, and I am very excited to be talking Grizzlies basketball with you, dear listener, dear viewer, on this edition of the podcast. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies, and I am hopeful that you will make myself and DeMichael a daily part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. If you do not already do so, dear listener, dear viewer, I also want to shout out our free daily newsletter. I'm a very happy and proud writer of that newsletter. We're up around 1,100 subscribers now, which is wonderful. That number keeps growing. Please, it's free. Check out our daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Click on the Locked On Grizzlies tab. And again, another way to make Locked On Grizzlies a part of your daily NBA and Grizzlies content consumption, our free daily newsletter. Go to lockedondaily.com and subscribe to the free daily Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. The Memphis Grizzlies scared us in that New York Knicks game, right? That was over a week ago, and it feels like a distant memory considering how Memphis has played since then. A gutsy victory over the Houston Rockets at home, then a big-time win Sunday night against the Milwaukee Bucks, second night of a back-to-back back at home against the Spurs, a chance to potentially have a letdown game, and it was a little bit iffy there in the first half, not going to lie, but the Grizzlies found a way to close things out in the second half. Memphis had a 12-point lead at the half. Third quarter got a little bit scary. The Spurs won 32-30. Memphis closed things out in the fourth, 37-28 final frame helps them lock in a 128-109 win. It was a great game for the Stars. And it was starting off with Ja Morant, a great game for him because Ja has obviously been struggling of late. That's been talked about a lot. His body language, what his mental is. Is he locked in with the Grizzlies? People floating the ideas of trading him. I want to stress, whenever I did that on social media at X, at Joe Mullinax, it was entirely a joke. I would in no way, shape, or form trade Ja Morant. In large part because you're not getting equal value for him. He's a lot more important to Memphis than he is anybody else in the NBA. But also partly because it's not good basketball sense. The guy is one of the top 15 or so players in the league when he is right. And he was right against the San Antonio Spurs. 4 turnovers, but like DeMichael and I have talked about here on Locked On Grizzlies, a guy with the usage rate of Ja Morant, you forgive that a little bit more than maybe you do a guy with a lower usage rate. Still had 11 assists, 3 rebounds, 3 steals, did a tremendous job attacking passing lanes. He was aggressive defensively, made 4 threes in the contest, really made the Spurs pay for the way that they were defending him. An efficient 25 points on 18 shots, a double-double. Kudos to Ja, a really impressive performance. Also, kudos to Jaren Jackson Jr., the all-star representative for Memphis this season, 31 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. He does all this damage, 3 blocks, 1 steal in just 31 minutes of play. No Grizzly player played more than Jaren in this contest at 31 minutes. The Stars came out big for the Grizzlies, and that was important because obviously Desmond Bane out with it's now been diagnosed as a foot sprain, Head coach Taylor Jenkins made it sound like in pregame media availability that he was going to be out for a little while, hopefully not too long. The way that it sounded to me, and again, no inside information here, just kind of spitballing from hearing Taylor Jenkins talk about injuries a lot over the years, I would imagine we'll see Dez after the All-Star break. I don't think we'll see him over the next week and a half, and then the Grizzlies obviously have another week off. Everybody that's not named Jaren Jackson Jr., 2 to 3 weeks would be my guess, and we'll kind of revisit when the Grizzlies come back from the All-Star break. Of course, they could come up with an official medical update at any time, and DeMichael and I will talk about that on future episodes of Locked On Grizzlies. I am curious to see how the Grizzly stars continue to mix and mingle with Grizzlies players as they come back from injury. Gigi Jackson, who we'll talk about more later on in the show, had his best game of the season so far, looking very much like the Gigi that I envisioned as a sixth-man bucket getter off the bench. He did exactly that for Memphis in this contest against the Spurs. How players like Gigi log those minutes alongside Ja Morant in particular. Vince Williams Jr. and Marcus Smart were upgraded on the injury report. When the Grizzlies move you from out to doubtful, that usually means you're a game or so away, usually a game away, from making your return. Now, is that convenient timing with the trade deadline coming up? And we'll talk more about that later on the show as well. Perhaps it might be convenient timing if you're an NBA trade deadline cynic. But I'm going to be optimistic on this episode, considering that Memphis is one of the hottest, if not the hottest teams in the NBA, 9-1 in their last 10 games. I'm going to choose the path of optimism. And I'm going to say that Marcus Smart, Vince Williams Jr., they're just going to add to the depth of this Grizzlies team that was on full display against the Spurs. You had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys play at least 21 minutes in the contest. Jalen Wells did not have his best game. 1 for 3 from the floor. Did some good things defensively, but overall, a performance to forget. His fellow rookie, Zach Edey, was on the opposite end of the spectrum. 16 points, 14 rebounds, a team best plus 25 when he was on the floor. Single game plus minus is always risky business when you quote it as a statistic for proving a point. I'm acknowledging that, but plus 25 stands out. That is significant. That tells you that he made an impact. An example of plus minus being a solid stat in this game, perhaps. Victor Wembanyama for the Spurs, the only Spurs starter that was positive in the plus minus market, plus 8. So he was the best Spur player on the court. Not too surprising. Zach Edey made a major impact in his minutes. 3 steals, 1 block. He's really finding his footing and adjusting and adapting in game on the fly, which is really promising to see. It makes you think that Edey could be a contributor in a playoff run if Memphis gets to that point. And they certainly look like they're going to make the playoffs. The question is, who do they play? Matchups matter. How does Edey continue to evolve his game over the next couple of months, leading into a significant spring in Memphis, which is nice to say again after the debacle that was last season. I was really also quickly going to give a shout out to Scottie Pippen Jr., who has been much maligned on this podcast. I have not always been the biggest Scottie Pippen Jr. fan. I've been a critic of his, asking for fewer minutes for him. He played 22 minutes in this contest, and he earned every one of them. 11 points, 5 assists, only 1 turnover. Scottie has been one of the biggest issues when it comes to the team's turnover woes. That was not the case in this contest. He was diving for loose balls. He was competing. And that's the best thing that I can say about these Grizzlies over the last couple of games between the Milwaukee Bucks game. Obviously, DeMichael had the Monday show solo, and Monday night's game against the Spurs is the team competed, right? That Knicks game shook up all of us, or at least it shook up me. Maybe I won't speak for you, but I will speak for me. It shook me up because that is a team that the Grizzlies, theoretically, that quality of team, that caliber of team, Memphis is going to have to get through to get to the Western Conference Finals because the Houston Rockets exist, right? It's fun to get jokes off on the Dallas Mavericks, but the Dallas Mavericks are still going to be a really good basketball team in the here and now. Long term, it's the most ridiculous trade I've ever heard and seen. But in the short term, I don't think you see Dallas drop off as much as some people might suggest. Dallas is still around. Obviously, the Oklahoma City Thunder still exist. Houston Rockets, of course, still exist. There are some good basketball teams in the Western Conference. The Los Angeles Clippers, the Denver Nuggets, the Lakers are among the hottest teams in the league right now. And they just added Luka freaking Doncic. So the Western Conference is loaded. Memphis Grizzlies may still need to make a deal to try to keep up with the arms race. We'll talk more about that here in a bit. But again, 9-1 in the last 10. Even with that Knicks game and how badly that went for the Grizzlies, the last couple of weeks have been really solid basketball as they get guys back into the mix. It's an exciting time to follow the Grizzlies. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling coming out of that big win over the Spurs. It was good to see Ja and Jaren both shine in that game. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will talk about the young Grizzly star, Gigi Jackson, really starting to heat up at the perfect time for Memphis. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We often hear about the red flags, things that you want to avoid. But what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships? Green flags. If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them, actively practice them, and even embody that green flag energy yourself. Whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself personally, therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy can help you develop healthy boundaries, improve your communication skills, and it can empower you to set clear expectations and express your needs in any given relationship. Managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down is also a space that therapy can provide tools for. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from. And if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Gigi Jackson is a player that a month or so ago, I said something pretty controversial. I didn't think it was that controversial, but if you follow me on social media at Joe Mullinax, you know I tend to be polarizing from time to time among Grizzlies fans. Hopefully the folks that love me, hate me, are indifferent towards me. Very few of those that are indifferent towards me. When I head to Memphis in the middle of March, that trip is booked. And Michael and I are going to plan a live Locked On Grizzlies recording. Excited to work with DeMichael in person for the first time, which is wild to say. I feel like I know him pretty well and never physically met him. It's going to be really fun to work with DeMichael and be in that space and have the opportunity to be back in Memphis that weekend of March 14th, 15th. So make sure you hang around, say hello. More to come on that trip for me. But I said something that was pretty polarizing, and it was about Gigi Jackson being a garbage scorer in last season's games. Now, I should have added time after the word garbage, because that's what I meant. Garbage time score. Obviously, Gigi Jackson, one of the best young scorers in the entire NBA, is not a garbage scorer. And I will point to, if you are an everydayer of this podcast, all of the shows over the summer and in the preseason where I talked about Gigi Jackson being my sixth man. That was my pick. That was my guy to be the bucket getter off the bench for this Grizzlies team as a playoff contributor. To me, for a player as young and inexperienced as Gigi, that is a pretty high compliment. So I was high on Gigi, and then Gigi got hurt. And I was legitimately concerned about whether or not he'd be able to get acclimated to the Grizzly schemes, especially this new look offense, given the fact that he missed so much of training camp. He's missed so much practice. Monday night was the first time where you're able to kind of sit there and say, I think everything's going to be all right. Because, man, did he look good. 27 points on 20 shots, 4 of 9 from beyond the arc, 4 rebounds using that big 6'9", 225 frame. Again, 3 steals. The Grizzlies had 17 steals against the Spurs in this contest. 17 steals. Numerous players with at least 3 steals, and Gigi Jackson was one of them. He looked every bit the scorer, the talent that folks were tantalizingly looking at last season during that lost second half of the campaign when Taylor Jenkins was putting Gigi in positions to have to defend the opposing team's best player, where Gigi really was the main guy to be excited about watching the games. Gigi popped on the screen, and he deserves credit for that. He has found his conditioning, right? He played about 26 minutes, I believe it was, 28 minutes. Played 28 minutes in the contest against the Spurs. He was fluid in his movements. He attacked the rim. He was fluid in his jumper. His technique looked good. He had good lift on his shot. He has found his pace in the high-tempo Grizzlies offense in particular, and he's really solid using his body, getting to the rim, understanding his frame and how it can help him get advantages at and around the basket. Only one free throw, so obviously you'd like to see that be a little bit higher, but to an extent, if you watch NBA basketball, you know this to be true. That's out of his control a little bit, right? Not entirely in his hands. John Morant only having 3 free throws in the contest. Another good example of that. Sometimes the refs don't have the most advantageous whistle. Jaren Jackson Jr. got to the line 9 times. So maybe it's more so about how Gigi and Ja are doing it than what they are doing or what isn't being called. But Gigi is someone that, as we go into this trade deadline coming up on Thursday, what Memphis decides to do will be something we talk about later on in this show. It'll be something DeMichael and I talk about tomorrow. It's going to be the main storyline because coming out of the major trades that happened with Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis, of course, switching teams, Luka now in Los Angeles, Anthony Davis now in Dallas, De'Aaron Fox now with the Spurs, obviously San Antonio, a little bit weakened. Again, their top guys were still available. But if De'Aaron Fox had been on the floor for the Spurs, maybe the game's a little bit different. That'll happen eventually for San Antonio, of course. De'Aaron Fox now being in San Antonio. Zach LaVine now being in Sacramento. All of these moving pieces and it potentially just being the start, right? It potentially just being the beginning of that craziness because of the reports of the Golden State Warriors wanting to be active, because of all of the other competitive natured teams in the Western Conference. We haven't seen this level of competition. There's not really a bunch of tanking out west. Out east, there's several tankers. And don't get me wrong, Utah is pretty clearly tanking at this point. But I am intrigued by Gigi Jackson being that midseason acquisition. And that's always a cop-out, right? That's what somebody says when they don't want to draw a line in the sand and go, Memphis is going to make a trade. Boom, here's why. Right? That's something that people do when they just want to, ride the wave of good vibes. I'm not necessarily going to do that later on in the show, but I do want to acknowledge, A, that Gigi is not a garbage scorer. He never was. Garbage time scorer at Joe Mullinax on X, if you want to yell at me about that. It was true, but it didn't mean that those skills couldn't translate. I felt that they would translate in that 6-man role, and that's exactly what happened on Monday night. So if you want to yell at me in the comments or yell at me on X and say, stand on this, Joe Mullinax, guess what? I'm going to. Because I felt that those skills would be able to translate into this Grizzlies team as a reserve. My biggest question for Gigi in terms of not being a starter, his inability to facilitate offense for others. In his 28 minutes played, he only had 1 assist. I like Gigi as a guy that can get a bucket off the bench. Do I care if he facilitates offense for the second unit? A little bit. Not nearly as much as me wanting him to be that creator of offense off the dribble for Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant, making their life easier. Sure, those guys can do it by themselves. But you want to have a player out there that is a facilitator as well as a scorer. Gigi, at this stage of his young career, still very much in the scoring mindset. We already have Jaren Jackson Jr. that's still that guy. Gigi as a 6th man is extremely enticing. Gigi in that role the rest of the season. That's exactly what I wanted to see when the campaign began. So I'm excited for what Gigi did. I thought he looked really fluid. I thought he looked smooth. He looked comfortable, at least to my eye, for the first time this season. And the more comfortable that Gigi Jackson can get, the better for the Memphis Grizzlies, because that is going to mean better depth. It's cool to be deep, but you want to have quality depth, playoff depth. Can Gigi Jackson be a 9-man rotation guy in a team's pursuit of 16 wins in the postseason to make a postseason run? It's a fair question to ask, especially at this young age, but he took a step forward, in my eyes at least, on Monday night because he was aggressive, because he was able to put the ball in the bucket in a variety of ways. He showcased the skill set that made people so excited last season alongside Ja Morant and in a competitive setting. The Spurs aren't the best team in the NBA, but they're not the worst. A good step in the right direction for Gigi Jackson. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will close out this episode of the show talking about what I think Memphis will do at the trade deadline. Obviously, we'll make official predictions as the week goes on, but here's where I'm leaning going into the trade deadline on Thursday. We'll talk about that next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. What kind of trade are the Memphis Grizzlies going to make? That's something, again, DeMichael and I are going to talk about it plenty on tomorrow's show as we preview a Toronto Raptors team that is very different from the last time the Memphis Grizzlies saw the Toronto Raptors. You want to talk about the hottest teams in the NBA, Memphis, winners of 9 of their last 10. The Toronto Raptors have won 8 of their last 10 as of this recording. They're a team that looks the part of a squad that maybe could sneak and ease their way back into a pretty bad play-in mix. As the Chicago Bulls trade away Zach LaVine, maybe they trade away some other guys at the deadline. The Toronto Raptors could maybe slide on up into that play-in conversation over the next few weeks. Toronto's playing really good ball at the moment. We'll preview that game, but we'll also talk a ton about the trade deadline and maybe players that we would like in particular. That makes a lot of sense to me, the type of guy that we want to see them go for. This segment is going to focus on who I think Memphis is going to prioritize shipping out. And at this point, it sounds a lot like the last time I talked about Luke Kennard. Because Luke Kennard, who had a decent game against the Spurs, not his best game ever. Luke Kennard was a starter, 1 for 6, 0 for 3, or 0 for 3 from beyond the arc. Had 3 assists, so he still helped in some way, but it wasn't Luke's best night, fair to say. Same thing with Jalen Wells. Wells and Kennard both went 0 for 3, 0 for 5 combined. So not the best night for Luke Kennard. Luke has done enough, though, in the last several weeks where I believe that he should not be the first name that comes out of the mouth of Grizzlies GM Zach Kleiman in trade negotiations. The first name that should come out of his mouth is Marcus Smart. Because Marcus Smart, A, has not played a ton of meaningful basketball for the Memphis Grizzlies. We've said this over and over again. I think it was Fast Break Breakfast on X that pointed it out on social media. Jay Huff has now played in numerous more games than Marcus Smart has as a member of Memphis Grizzlies, and that is a problem, right? For obvious reasons. Marcus Smart is not Jay Huff, vice versa. You would hope that Marcus Smart, who is brought here to be the 4th guy, the 4th or 5th best player at worst, would have been on the court more. Because of the development of bigger wings, Jalen Wells being what he is as a rookie, Jake LaRavia having a strong season, Gigi Jackson returning, Vince Williams Jr. eventually coming back, sooner rather than later, we hope. Marcus Smart is redundant, and Marcus Smart is undersized. He brings a veteran experience that you can't teach. That is his greatest value to this team. And of course, as a defender, he's still a plus. He has aggression and tenacity that he can bring into a game to help spark energy off the bench. That matters too. So I don't want to make it sound like I've completely given up on Marcus Smart. If he is still a Memphis Grizzly when the trade deadline passes on Thursday, I'm going to be okay with that. But because of his salary and how it can allow for them to get access to players like a Cam Johnson, I think that Smart should be the first name out of Zach Kleiman's mouth. The second name should be John Conchar. And yeah, he looked good in his 9 minutes against the San Antonio Spurs. But if you're an everydayer to Locked On Grizzlies, me bringing up Conchar in a trade is not going to surprise you. I am over the Conchar experiment. I think that it's not necessarily an experiment. He's proven he's an NBA player. I'll give him that. But it's $6 million for an end-of-bench guy? Even in the modern NBA, that feels like a lot. Plus, he's under contract for the next several years, and it's a chance to clean up your books a little bit. So those are the two names that I would start with, Marcus Smart and John Conchar. But to make that trade more attractive, because you're going to have to do that. Marcus Smart has been out for a while, right? His value has taken a hit. John Conchar, as much as I talk about him not being particularly good or great at anything, other NBA teams know that better than I do. So you're going to have to attach some draft capital. I'm saying 2 first-round picks. 2 first-round picks. This year's first-round pick in 2025, and then a protected one down the road. And one that's not that protected. I don't want it to be, it's going to become 2 seconds. No, let it be an actual first. Because Memphis, if they are to go and get somebody like a Cam Johnson, theoretically speaking, that is not going to be a very good pick anyway. The Memphis Grizzlies should be competing in the top 5 of the NBA with a Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, and adding Cam Johnson over the next couple of seasons core. So a 2027 first should be 25, 26, 27 overall. There is room for movement with these draft picks. And that's where I would try to make the deal a little bit more attractive. But let's say the Nets in particular, because Cam Johnson, that's a rumor that's still out there. I refuse to acknowledge the Jimmy Butler rumor that refuses to die. Cam Johnson is one that makes me at least feel better, even if it's not actually true, right? At least we have the background of Dorian Finney-Smith. Memphis has been in touch with Brooklyn in the past. Let's say that they don't want John Conchar. Okay. Jake LaRavia is a player that has limitations, right? But he's a young player. He checks that box. Contractually, you have to figure out how you're going to try to keep him around. But he has real skill, and he has shown that defensively as a shooter. He is a more complete player, and he has a higher ceiling than a John Conchar. That would be the next name that I would bring up. But again, there's uncertainty with that contract, it not being opted into by the Grizzlies. Say Memphis, we're not interested in that either. The name that I would end with is Marcus Smart and Santi Aldama. Now, I'm not sure I include that second first if Aldama is the guy that gets shipped out, because obviously Brooklyn could re-sign Santi pretty easily at a cheaper price than Cam Johnson. They do similar things, right, as combo forwards, and Santi would be missed. Santi is having a career year. He's a top 5 or so candidate for 6th man of the year. Kudos to Santi for that. But again, G.G. Jackson's back. And if you look at the numbers of Cam Johnson, what Santi Aldama does well, Cam Johnson just does better. Cam Johnson is among the top percentages, the very best in terms of points per shot attempt, according to Cleaning the Glass. 133.9 points per shot attempt going into Monday night's contest. That is darn impressive. That is something that deserves a tip of the cap, to say the least. Cam Johnson is better at what Santi Aldama does. And that should be the focus of any trade that may come through. If you're going to condense depth, you have to get better. If you're not so much worried about money and cleaning up your books, Cam Johnson would not accomplish that. His contract would overlap with a Jaren extension. The luxury tax would indeed be coming if Robert Pear is actually willing to pay it. But Cam Johnson makes you better. Marcus Smart, John Conchar, and a couple of firsts. For Cam Johnson, I'd be thrilled. But if you had to replace Conchar with Santi Aldama and you take out a first, I'm still listening. I'm open to that framework because Cam is better than Santi. And what Cam brings to the table can potentially get Memphis over the hump as a team that is trying to win a championship. And if you've been with us since the beginning, dear listener, dear viewer, are you trying to win a championship or not? Santi Aldama can contribute in that manner. Cam Johnson can do it better. I would not go beyond that. The rumors of Vince Williams Jr., I understand. Including him, I would try Santi first. I really would. Because I think Vince Williams Jr. is on a team-friendly deal and can contribute as a defender to this team as a wing. Santi Aldama up for restricted free agency. the money gets a little bit tighter in Memphis as that Jaren extension looms in the future. Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. As I mentioned, DeMichael Cole and I will be back tomorrow together talking about Grizzlies Raptors, of course, also talking about the trade deadline. We haven't had a chance to really break down Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox being together. Maybe DeMichael has a particular player. Cam Johnson's the one that is really in the hearts and minds of all Grizzlies fans. Maybe DeMichael wants to go in a different direction, different position type. We'll talk about that and more in our next episode. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Wherever you get your podcasts, we are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can make DeMichael and I part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. And make sure you're going to our free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Click on the subscribe button for Locked On Grizzlies. Get Grizzlies words from me, NBA content, fantasy basketball advice, and so much more. Again, it is free. It is a daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Subscribe if you have not already done so. And thank you if you have already subscribed. Thank you for being with me on this edition of the show. Until next time, I'm Joe Mullinax. The Grizzlies are among the best teams in the Western Conference. What does that mean for the trade deadline? Something we'll continue to tackle here on Locked On Grizzlies.